everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Using the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit in Adult Education. Today's webinar is generously sponsored by Burlington English, and today we have Laura Smart with us, who's going to share a few words. Laura?
Thank you, Mr. Bonney, so much for that introduction. My name is Laura Smart. I am the Indiana and Kentucky representative for Burlington English. I am so excited to be here today to hear about this information we're going to be learning about. I just want to show you a little bit of information about Burlington and what we can do to help you get your students ready to build that toolkit in adult education. We all know that guiding students to their next steps in careers is what we're here for. And we need to do that from the very first day they walk to the classroom, getting them ready for those careers, getting them thinking about what they want to do with their lives. So Burlington has laid everything out for you, whether you are very skilled in getting students ready for careers and new at it, you were like, I'm not too sure. Burlington has everything laid out for you as far as starting those conversations with your students. And we also make teaching easier with Burlington English. I'm a lifetime educator myself. I always felt like I was reinventing the wheel. Burlington has made it easier for us. Everything's like a one-stop shop right there where you need it. We have career exploration and soft skills, which really help pave the way for students to think about what their career goals are, what kind of classes they need to take, and kind of courses they need to do on their way to get their career going. And we also help students make the right career choice. Within our career exploration and soft skills, we have 16 Department of Labor job clusters that specifies the job duties of that specific skills, the abilities, and also the requirements needed for that job. And then as long as we're going that direction, we all know that goals motivate everybody. And goals need to keep the students persistent in keeping them going. Burlington has this wonderful tool called a digital portfolio. It helps keep those students' visual goals in mind, to keep their eye on the prize, thinking about studying for that ABE program. And then what's next is possibly getting their equivalency test or their diploma, or possibly even getting a certificate, which might follow into getting an apprenticeship. It has it all right there, keeps them motivated. They can check those things right off of their list. So if you are interested in going with Burlington, and we can help you with so many different things. Every face that you see on the screen are wonderful customer managers, and we all have a passion for education, and we're here to serve you. And that's the one best thing at all about Burlington English, is that we have this wonderful customer service by far. So we are here to assist you in any way whatsoever. So please feel free to contact us at www.burlingtonenglish.com. And thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the webinar. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Bonney.
Laura, thank you so much. We're so grateful for your partnership and friendship and everything that Burlington English does for the field of adult education. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right, well, welcome everybody. Let's see, if you want to let us know in the chat box where you're calling in from today, you can type in your name and your location. That would be helpful. If you have questions during today's webinar, you can submit those in the Q&A box. Our presenters today are Peter Simon, Jennie, Mollica, and Colleen Beck. And with that, I will hand it over to them. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Colleen Beck from Softball Partners. I'm excited to share a little about Softball Partners Center of Excellence and our work with COABE. The Center of Excellence mission is to build partnerships to accelerate registered apprenticeship adoption and improve alignment with our nation's workforce and education systems. COABE serves as a partner for the Center of Excellence to provide strategic partnership and system alignment. one of the goals of the center is to build technical assistance and provide resources to support your program. So through COABE, we disseminate those technical assistance resources and also solicit input to get feedback on initiatives we're working on. SOPL is really proud to team up with COABE to ensure that students who take ABE courses have increased access to high quality career paths through apprenticeships. And if you're interested in becoming a partner of the center, I'll share a link in the chat later. So thank you to COABE for facilitating this webinar. And thank you to Peter Simon and Jennie Mollica for being here. And I'd love to introduce them as well. Peter Simon brings to his work with High Road Alliance many years of experience as a community college career and technical education administrator who has supported the building of innovative workforce development partnerships. He provided leadership to pioneering efforts in several sectors to link labor and management collaboration with college programs, adult education providers, workforce boards, and community organization. His work has consistently focused on creating training and employment opportunities for those who have been historically underserved. And Jennie Mollica has over 20 years of practitioner and leadership experience in the fields of workforce development, adult education, and community development. She has expertise in the collaborative design and sustainability of career education programs that are equitably accessible to work learners with barriers, including limited English and basic skills, and in the delivery program and partnership development, fund development, strategic planning, qualitative research, writing, and evaluation for public and nonprofit agencies. Her prior roles include Director of Planning and Program Development at Jewish Vocational Service in San Francisco, a $7 million workforce development nonprofit, staff to the Annie E. Casey Foundation's Making Connections Oakland Initiative, and Associate Director of Lao Family Community Development, a multi-site immigrant and refugee services agency. So thank you so much, Jennie and Peter, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Jennie.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank
Do
you,
wanna-
James. Thank you, Laura. I'm going to
Are
share
you-
my screen now. Hold
Yes,
on one
cool.
second.
Voila.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We're so happy to be here. Really delighted to have been invited by COABE and by SAFEL to participate with this webinar and to celebrate National Apprenticeship Week with our favorite adult education crowd. We have created this toolkit in part out of a real belief that apprenticeship is a very strong career training opportunity, which more should benefit from, and also with a real belief that adult education partners are key to making apprenticeships equitably accessible to our communities. So we're just delighted to be here today and to share with you hopefully some useful tools and tips. Get this toolkit in your hands and let you know that we are interested in what you're doing and eager to support in any way. So we have a short time today, but we're going to give you a quick kind of overview and hope to spark your interest. We were introduced just a minute ago. I don't think we have to add too much to this, Peter. That was kind of an extensive introduction. We both have background in adult education and are really firm believers that adult education is absolutely essential to making our career education programs, career pathways accessible. So thank you for welcoming us today. Peter.
So very briefly, what we hope to accomplish today. We're going to give you an overview of the Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit that we've created, and specifically to talk about how it's been used by apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship design teams. Importantly for this audience, we really want to highlight the role of adult education as a partner in both pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs, and we have some examples to share with you. As you know, that we've actually worked with some specific programs where we're including adult ed with these programs. And we want to make sure to have time to have a discussion at the end and to address some of your questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A and we will make every effort to address them. Next.
So before we dive in, we're a pretty big group today, and we were hoping to learn just a little bit about your all current level of involvement with apprenticeships. So we have a little poll that should pop up on your screen in just a moment, and it's going to allow you to just let us know, are you a complete beginner, which is fine, or have you been working with apprenticeships for some time? Are you actively involved? James or Colleen, I think you have, here we go. Here is our poll. Part of the reason we put this poll here is that when we created this toolkit, we really felt that it could be equally valuable to someone who was just beginning, just thinking about how to maybe approach some apprenticeship programs to partner with or be involved in starting a new apprenticeship, or for those who were already involved in apprenticeships but knew that equity was an issue and wanted to do better. So we'll talk about how teams, regardless of where you're at in this landscape, could make use of the toolkit. That seems like a good amount of time for the poll. Maybe we can close it and kind of see who's in the room.
What have we got?
The suspense. Okay. Ooh, lots of curious and exploring possibilities. How great. Or not involved, but hoping to be. So that's really good to know. Very few are involved in, it looks like really no more than 10%, just a little over 10% involved in apprenticeship already, an active apprenticeship. So this is a message for those who are involved, that there may still be opportunities to do more using this toolkit, but definitely for those of you who are exploring, we're delighted you're here and hope that this will be useful for you. Our big message is adult education should be at the table, whether they're just beginning to be these sort of conversations in your community or whether people are already gathering, developing apprenticeships. You should be part of the conversation.
Okay, well, then we're going to dive in and introduce briefly to the sort of genesis and structure of the apprenticeship toolkit, Equitable. I'm going to put right now the link is in the slideshow, but I'm going to put it also in the chat. So if you want to access it right away, there it is. I just want to say that this Equitable Apprenticeship Toolkit, we actually grew out of work we were doing in the state of California with a number of people. It wasn't just Jennie and I coming up with this. It was many, many people who we met through interviews, surveys. We had peer learning circles, and we worked with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. And it became apparent that it would be really valuable to have a toolkit specifically around equity and apprenticeship. There's lots and lots of toolkits out there, I think, as you know, but we found that there was nothing that specifically addressed how equity related to the issue of apprenticeship. Next slide. Sort of core to the toolkit is a framework that we developed, and we very consciously made this a circle because whether or not you're just starting out or you've been working with an apprenticeship for years, we think that all of these elements are worth looking at and revisiting. Typically, often, when people talk about equity, they think about access and recruitment, which is important, but we also included all these other areas, which I think are also key aspects of addressing equity. We're going to talk in a little bit about pre-apprenticeship, which is sort of a doorway in for a lot of people who need either support or additional skills. But importantly, the transition to apprenticeship from pre-apprenticeship is where we've learned statistically that a lot of women and people of color inordinately drop out and get lost in that process. And similarly, in making apprenticeship accessible. And a lot of what we're going to talk about here is identifying and addressing barriers. So that's a lot of what's in the toolkit in terms of creating access. And of course, just how you set up your pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship program and how you design and deliver it. There's numerous equity issues involved with that as well. So this is just sort of the organizing framework of the whole toolkit.
And Peter, don't you think a message for our COABE audience is that adult ed has a role at each of these stages?
Yes,
It really,
yes,
you know,
yep.
we've seen adult ed partnering definitely in
Yep.
pre-apprenticeships, but also in apprenticeship delivery. The transition supports that adult ed providers are just good at are often missing from these sorts of pathways. And certainly the access and recruitment, it's your students who could really benefit these apprenticeship programs and their reach into communities. So glad you're here.
And just to add on to what Jennie said to this audience is, I think you all know in the grant world, and there's lots of money flowing into this world of apprenticeship and workforce development, every single grant asks, how is your program going to address the needs of underserved populations? And guess what? Those people you serve as adult education are exactly the people they're looking for. So this is an incredibly great time to be partnering with all of these projects. I just want to make a plug for
Good.
that.
Yeah, glad you made that point.
Yes.
And as we progress along here, feel free to put questions in the Q&A. We really want to make
Please.
sure we're hearing from you and responding
Yes.
to those. So Peter and I have had the delightful experiences of using this toolkit with a growing number of partnerships. And we've really seen how it's helping teams to apply an equity lens to every aspect of what they're doing in conceptualizing, building, designing, and running their apprenticeship programs. So it's good to see that this is serving to be useful, and not just as a one-time take a glance at it and think about it, but sort of coming back to some of the concepts and some of the tools. It really is best used by a team. It's not an individual who's going to be able to kind of look at all the different aspects of what could be done to address equity and what it takes to build an apprenticeship. And so we see the toolkit used well when it's shared among partners. There are tools here for what we describe as information gathering, which is really kind of understanding your community, understanding your workforce, understanding employers and the hiring needs, understanding disparities that are there, and then understanding barriers to addressing some of the equity issues. So there's an information gathering piece, and then there's an action planning piece. And that's really identifying what are the models out there, what are the effective practices, what are the resources I can bring to this, and kind of putting all the pieces together to act. So there are some tools here for actually creating those action plans. And it's important to know that you don't have to take on all of this at once. There might be one single tool that's appropriate for you today, might be something you come back to later.
And here in one slide is a listing of all the 14 tools in the toolkit. I'm certainly not going to read this slide to you, and you will have this presentation just to give you an idea of how we've broken this down. And as I look at this list, and I think about the people who've used the toolkit, I think the key feedback we've gotten is that, lots of people talk about equity these days, but it can be kind of overwhelming and not really knowing exactly how to start or address all these issues. And we've heard that the value of this toolkit often is kind of taking it apart in chunks so that people have an opportunity to think about it systematically. And I think this slide kind of captures that.
I'm glad you make that point, Peter, because especially for those who are just exploring apprenticeship or curious about it, thinking it might be a direction to go, especially if you think it could benefit the students in your programs currently, just knowing that there are ways of kind of breaking it down and seeing how do we take this one step at a time, kind of understand what are the roles we can play. And if you look through these tools, you'll see adult education mentioned in a number of them, like, do your apprentices have basic skills needs? Well, talk to your adult school. That's sort of spread throughout.
Mhm.
Here's a slide that just sort of highlights some of the possible uses of these information gathering tools. And you'll see that there are tools there for really digging in and understanding who are the demographics of the community, of the current workforce in this industry, of current apprentices, if it's an existing apprenticeship program, who's really accessing and succeeding in the apprenticeship program, or who's really getting the jobs in this industry, and what are potential barriers to more people entering. One thing we really emphasize is talking to workers, and those could be those enrolled in your adult ed programs who might be a perfect opportunity to kind of focus group and hear what are the interests of people who want to get into this industry and have had a hard time. What are some of the challenges? And this allows us to look carefully at what are the current conditions of equity and inequity. Where are there disparities? Where are there barriers to opportunity? And it helps us to think about what could be those more equitable outcomes, to set goals around that.
Also, in terms of using the action planning tools, it's really about focusing on solutions to address barriers that are identified. And we'll in a minute get a look at some of how these tools are organized. But in each one of the tools, we include promising practices and model programs. They say, wow, how do you get started? Well, here's some examples of people who have successfully done this. And we offer sort of a range, a spectrum of things to think about in terms of adapting the different program elements that are out there. And of course, a good part of the action planning tools is setting goals and figuring out who is going to do what to address equity issues.
So we're hoping to spend a few minutes before we wrap up today sharing with you some examples of how the toolkit is being used. You know, there are ways in which it's helpful to an apprenticeship team just sort of putting equity front and center and realizing that's something they do care to address. We've worked with existing apprenticeship programs that are identifying barriers for their existing apprentices. We've also worked with partners developing new either pre-apprenticeship or apprenticeship programs. And what we really see is that it helps them get going. It helps them decide what to try, what to learn from, and how to adapt.
Okay, well, again, here we're going to just dive in briefly and look at some of these tools. So are you going to go to the toolkit, Jenny?
This is going to be a quick fly by a few of the tools,
Okay.
just to give you a feel for what's in your toolkit.
Right, and we're going to talk about toolkit number one, information gathering tool number one.
Okay, we have a little less time than we were thinking we might, Peter, but it's still good to give a quick overview,
Right.
just so you get a feel for what's in here. Okay, so here's our tool number one.
Yes, and we're not going to go way deep in this, but we wanted you to see how these tools are organized. And I just want to make a plug that one thing we discovered working with a bunch of different teams is there's kind of a tug to dive into the nuts and bolts and get into the action planning. Let's get to work and get doing this. But we're just going to make a plug for taking the time to look through and use these information gathering tools. And that actually goes for existing apprenticeship programs that have been around for years. They may say, well, we're having trouble getting women into our apprenticeship, but they may not have really dug into what are the various issues. So that's what we're trying to provide a framework for asking questions. So each one of our tools starts out with a guiding question, and then each tool has a section called things to consider. And I just want to call your attention to the fact that this is not a paint by numbers toolkit. These are things you need to be thinking about when you set foot on this particular topic, okay? And you'll also see there it says key equity perspective, because one thing we even found ourselves doing is getting kind of pulled into the nuts and bolts of just setting up apprenticeship programs, and really wanted to make sure each tool stayed focused on the equity piece. There's lots of tool kits out there about how to start an apprenticeship or a pre-apprenticeship program. In fact, we include those in the toolkit, saying if you really need to learn about just nuts and bolts of setting up a pre-apprenticeship or an apprenticeship program, here are great resources, okay? And then each one has, as we mentioned before, examples for inspiration, programs we've learned about from the many people who've looked at this toolkit that, you know, give you some inspiration, and then close each section, each tool with reflection questions, again, things to think about. Each tool has a table, which you see here, where you can start gathering stuff. And we'll show you a little later, because this is a PDF, we created a companion workbook, which is in Microsoft Word. So you can take each one of these tables, customize it, and you can write on it, use it, share it. But this gives you an idea of just, again, how we break it down and want to start capturing this really valuable information. And again, I'm not going to read this list to you, but yeah, I think you can see very quickly, just visually, the kinds of barriers and issues that come up when you start kind of digging deeper.
I would just
Jennie.
add, Peter, and for all of you in the group today who are adult educators or connected to your adult education systems, you are such valuable resources to apprenticeship teams, because you know who in the community is working on their English. You know the basic math needs of community members. You know who is coming to your programs with learning abilities, with special education status, what the needs are around digital access. You may have a better sense of what some of the barriers to participation in apprenticeship could be than others at your table. And so you contribute some important ability to gather data and understand it, to understand your communities. So I'm going to fly ahead here, make everyone a little bit dizzy by going forward to an action planning tool, which is I'm going to choose Action Planning Tool 4 because it's related to pre-apprenticeship. And this is one we often hear questions about from adult education programs. So the action planning tools are a little bit different. This one, again, begins with a question in the beginning to sort of help define the problem. What is it we're trying to do with this tool? And then in this case, we provide some links to general tools for building pre-apprenticeships, because like Peter said, there are many, many links out there that are not focused on equity, but that are still very useful tools for building apprenticeship programs. So if this is where you're at, just beginning, you might actually benefit from a number of these links here. And then we add some things to consider that are specifically related to equity and to how you might go about building a pre-apprenticeship using some of the resources in this toolkit and keeping equity in mind. So we reference some of the other tools that you might want to use to complement this, and how you might be using a pre-apprenticeship to address some of the equity related needs. Then what you'll see in these action planning tools is just as many links to resources as we could find. Resource materials that are available on the web, descriptions of effective practices, of models that you might want to consider. Some of these are describing examples. You'll see here right at the top of the list of things to consider when building an apprenticeship is if there are barriers among the populations in your community related to basic English and math or related to English ability, how do you build these resources into your apprenticeship program so that these community members can participate? So you'll see here just a whole number of links. We also try to include some links to just example programs that you might want to browse through, hopefully get inspired by those. And then again, reflection actions and just a little simple template for filling out some actions you might want to take. So I think with that, we're ready to go back to our little presentation here. And oops, I'm going to fly through a few slides.
A bit redundant, yeah.
Yes, we don't need to
One more there.
share
Let's
those.
see. Go to there
Okay.
we go. And as we mentioned before, and you'll have this PowerPoint we'll also make available to you. There's a companion workbook that is in Microsoft Word, and the link is there. Again, so that we found that even though we made an effort to include all the fields we could think of, that in your particular context, in your community, there may well be other areas that you want to add, and that's fine. We're not attached. And I just want to add also that the toolkit and the workbook are in the public domain. We're not selling it. It's available for you to use. It's available for you to share with your partners. We want it to be used, and it's free.
Thank you to Grow Apprenticeship California and the James Irvine Foundation for that.
Yes.
These are available to all.
Yep.
Okay, so we want to share with you just quickly 2 examples of how we've seen the toolkit used to address equity, specifically with adult education as a really key partner. And I see, oh, thank you for the question in the chat. We'll probably be pausing to answer questions at the end, but if we see them as they come in, we can address them too. Our apprenticeships most often paid or unpaid. The beauty of apprenticeship is it's an actual job. So it is
Right.
paid full-time employment for your students who are also having the opportunity to study. So good thing to know about apprenticeships. All right, so here's an example. Peter and I have been working to bring adult education partners into apprenticeship teams to address the needs of English language learners. And this is in the finishing trades. Why using the toolkit made sense. So Peter and I were asked by the union training program what they could do to increase diversity generally in their finishing trades apprenticeships, but specifically in a few communities where there was growing hiring need. There was a lot of opportunity, a lot of apprenticeship training slots available. The apprenticeship programs already existed. They had instructors on board, the employers were ready to hire, and they were receiving applicants, and the applicants were typically Spanish speakers. Now, they debated. They had a bilingual instructor, so they could just run the program in Spanish, but they wondered how could their apprentices learn English? They recognized that English was needed not only to get through the training, but also to be hired by an employer, by a contractor. English is needed on the job for safety and for following instructions and for communicating, for making friends, for interacting with their supervisors. So English was really a critical piece. And this program didn't know what to do to bring these applicants into the program who are potentially great workers. Using the toolkit, we were able to talk with them about some possible models, some possible approaches, and very importantly, some possible partnerships, namely with public adult education providers who they had never heard of. They weren't familiar with public workforce development system. Most of the administrators and instructors within this apprenticeship program were out of the trades themselves. They'd worked in the field and then entered under other roles. So they weren't familiar with the extent of these programs, with the resources that go into them, or with models like integrated education and training that could bring English into their vocational skills training. In fact, the union even had developed years earlier a vocational English as a second language curriculum, but no one knew it existed. And funny enough, apprenticeship outcomes are very, very well aligned with WIOA Title II and many of the goals of our adult education programs. These students get measurable skills gains and they get employment and wage increases. What a beautiful thing. So we brought these partners together. We connected the union apprenticeship programs with adult education providers in their community. The union was thrilled to have free English classes on site at their union training centers. The instruction could be contextualized for the trades, and the building trades training instructors were delighted to be able to partner with an English teacher. So it really was seen as we call it a win-win-win-win because you had the employers and the union right there saying, thank you very much, an existing training program, and the adult education providers. This allowed the program to enroll workers with limited English who otherwise would have failed an initial exam and not been allowed to enter. It meant the apprenticeship instructor was able to have a partner and not handle this on his own. There was better retention possibility in the program because of the support that was offered. And the apprentices who graduated will be sure to, they haven't graduated yet, but they'll be sure to have all the finishing trade skills they need, and also the English language skills they'll need, not only in this job, but in future jobs. Now the union is interested in recruiting their journey level workers for English classes, so potential enrollment increases at the adult school. And they're just thrilled to be able to offer this. They had kind of written it off, thinking they didn't have money to hire English teachers. So it seems like a successful partnership and a good model.
Okay. The second example we're going to give, we had a chance to get in on the ground floor with a very innovative bus operator, actually a bus operator, a pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship in Northern California, driven by the fact that the transit company there and actually everywhere in most places in the United States are desperate for bus operators, which is a really good job. So this was the Sonoma Marin bus operator pre-apprenticeship with the Santa Rosa adult education part of it's the non-credit side of Santa Rosa Junior College. It's the transit agency, the Amalgamated Transit Union, and also a third-party intermediary called California Transit Works, who we worked with to help write these grants to fund these programs. And very briefly, I'm not going to read these slides to you, but the great thing was that we were able to use the toolkit right from the start with this team that was working on actually writing the grants that funded both the pre-apprenticeship and the apprenticeship. And we were able to start with $1 million from the state of California to make this happen. And it really was a team. It was a teamwork approach. We used, Jennie just showed that toolkit number 4, designing the pre-apprenticeship, and they literally took the barriers, lined up most of the ones that made sense that were barriers in this community, and used that as an organizing principle to write sections of the grant. We had a very strong labor management partnership already, which really helped. And we were able to build what's the first in the United States bus operator pre-apprenticeship, where they go from this right into a job as a bus operator. Next slide. So that's how we designed the program. You know, the important part of access and recruitment is, again, working with the employers. They were able to think about barriers, and in analyzing the information gathering part, they discovered that something like 70% of the people who failed the test to get into the apprenticeship were low income and people of color. So they said, you know what? We're going to design the pre-apprenticeship program so well, we're going to just not require people coming out of that program to even take the test. They just eliminated the test as a barrier. Also, the adult school hired a bilingual outreach specialist to both recruit, but also to stick with the students through the program. And importantly, the company was so eager to get people, they offered a stipend and a bonus for people signing up and then completing the program. And all of this is going to be offered online, so people don't have to commute to somewhere to take these classes. Next slide. Then when the pre-apprenticeship was set up, maybe one thing we discovered, just again talking to a lot of people, is one of the big problems is you have a pre-apprenticeship program, but then it takes 6 months to get into the apprenticeship, and nobody can wait that long. So we were able to actually align the pre-apprenticeship to the apprenticeship training. So there's only a few weeks between finishing the program and going right into the apprenticeship. And I just want to note that just last week, the first cohort of pre-apprentices successfully graduated, and they will be starting right after Christmas. The classes will be are being taught in a bilingual format. And the whole pre-apprenticeship was developed by that team of the employers, the union, and the peer mentors, the bus drivers who are actually helping with this program. Next slide. again, as I mentioned before, in terms of the transitioning people into the apprenticeship, there are paid peer mentors who are bus drivers who take time out of their work week and actually help with the instruction and the practicum class, which is part of the apprenticeship. And again, it's been really exciting, I just have to say, as an educator, to be in these meetings where you have the bus operators, the company, and the adult education teachers building this curriculum from scratch, exactly for what is needed to become a successful bus driver. And then I just want to point out that after 1 year of apprenticeship, these folks who are coming out of the adult ed system into the apprenticeship will be making $70,000 a year as a bus driver. So that was just a quick glance of that very successful program.
Thank you, Peter. Love it.
A lot. Yeah, we're very excited about this.
Yeah, and I think we get excited that, we've worked with many adult ed programs and CTE programs, and it's just so great when you have an employer and a union right there. I mean, not all apprenticeships are with union partners, but many are, and they really sort of are the voice of the worker in some of these conversations. And to have these partners all at the table with adult education, designing programs that our students can enter so directly, it's really, and into paid jobs and not just work experience. It's a pretty exciting combination of elements.
And I would just like to add that when Jennie was talking about our work with the finishing trades, when we were able to contact the folks at the adult education sites in these various communities, their response was, "Oh my goodness gracious, we're so excited. When can we start?" There was no quibble. They said, "What a great opportunity," and just jumped on it. It's been very, very encouraging, the response from the adult education side. So we now actually right on schedule, have time. We'd love to hear some of your questions or thoughts, whatever. If there's stuff, there's no in the Q&A, maybe in the chat.
There's a question here in the chat, Peter. I'll read it from Jacqueline. For non-federally funded programs, what do you suggest as an approach to partner to help share costs? And maybe, Jacqueline, maybe you were noting that when in the examples that Peter and I described, the adult education partner brought those We Owe a Title II funds and was able to come to the apprenticeship and say no cost, and everyone was thrilled. Of course, there may be situations where there are expenses associated with offering another class and enrolling more students. Peter, did you have a response to that?
Well, short term, I just want to say, having been in the workforce development world for many decades, I have never seen a time when there's more money available to start these kinds of programs. So short term, just to kind of get started and to sort of demonstrate the viability of such a program, I would really encourage you to think about writing some form of state or federal or even private foundation grants. Apprenticeship is kind of everyone's darling topic now. So if you could show up as an adult education provider with an employer and maybe an employer in a union, I would almost guarantee you get some funding to get started. Longer term, that's a longer discussion. There's different ways that you can, the collab. I think once the value is demonstrated to the employer, often they will chip in as well. If you're providing them a pipeline of skilled workers, where in many occupations, they're desperate for skilled and prepared people with soft skills and technical skills, they will help out to sustain your program.
And some, I think, will have some existing funding for their instruction, their apprenticeship instruction, whoever that training provider is. And it may be that they could weave in the basic skills support to the extent that it could fit within that budget. It's definitely worth conversations about that. Angela has a question: workplace general class versus apprenticeship, the difference. Oh, yes, we didn't give the apprenticeship 101, Peter. We probably could have taken a few slides at the beginning to
Right.
talk about that. A registered apprenticeship is a quite defined program model. It's defined at the Federal Department of Labor level, and it's probably defined as well at your state and your local your state Department of Apprenticeships. And it requires a certain number of hours of in-class training and a certain number of hours of on-the-job training. It defines the role of a apprenticeship committee made up of partner representatives, employer, union, if there is one, that oversees the program, and it defines wage increases as an apprentice completes training and becomes more skilled. There are required wage increases. So it's quite formalized in what are called program standards that have to be approved in order for the program to be registered. And it requires, like we said, it requires that participant to be paid for their work time and to be essentially an employee of the company. What did I miss, Peter?
Well, I think just to mention briefly the role of pre-apprenticeship, increasingly both at the federal level and a lot of states are now talking about registered pre-apprentice. A lot of sort of bridge or prep classes are called pre-apprenticeship, but to be a formal pre-apprenticeship, you have to have some demonstrate that people going through the pre-apprenticeship have a particular pathway right into an apprenticeship. They need to be linked to, like Jennie mentioned, a registered apprenticeship, because the last thing you want to do is get people's hopes up and then there's no jobs, right? So that kind of linkage between the two is very important. So I think, again, the key thing is the beauty of an apprenticeship program for people we serve in adult education who don't have time to hang out in some kind of training program is they're getting paid, usually paid well, while they're learning. It's an earn and learn model. And they don't have a student debt.
Right. It's probably important to note that most likely you as an adult school, adult ed provider would not be going through that process of registering an apprenticeship.
No.
You are a valuable partner in what's a very collaborative project. And so the important thing is, like we said, being at the table, being part of those conversations, see what role you can play. And it shouldn't require you to step too far out of your lane in terms of creating a maybe a pre-apprenticeship, but creating an apprenticeship program, getting it registered, coordinating things with the employer to that extent. It's probably not going to be all in your lap. Important thing to note. So there's a question here from Corey. Are you aware of any funding stipends for prohibitive life circumstances like childcare and transportation? Such good questions, and often in using our information gathering tools, those come up as barriers for populations that would benefit so much from apprenticeship. Definitely WIOA Title I through our one-stop career centers, our American Job Centers. If someone is enrolled in WIOA and eligible for those public workforce system services, they should be able to receive childcare and transportation for their participation in these programs. It's also interesting to see that a lot of the flexible public funding that's being made available through competitive grants and things for apprenticeship, both at the state and federal levels, can be used for childcare and transportation in some cases, recognizing that those really are important barriers. I know we do a lot of our work in California, and California has just issued a large fund that can be used exclusively for childcare stipends for apprentices. So it's definitely worth looking around and seeing what's available in your community.
I see a question here also from Jacqueline about, are most apprenticeships construction related, or have there been models in hotel and restaurant management and or renewable energy? I think the classic sort of stereotype of apprenticeship, and the ones that have been around the longest, are the construction trades, but there's a huge array of apprenticeships growing out in California and across the country that are in any number of trades. So it's not restricted at all to construction.
And I think there are great examples in those sectors that you mentioned there.
I just want to say one thing about the childcare, that one thing we've encountered that's I find very inspiring is, one thing about the construction trades is they traditionally start very early in the morning, which when we've worked with groups, we're trying to reach more women into these trades. And of course, the issue of childcare is where would there be a childcare center where I could drop off my child at 6 o'clock in the morning? And we've actually heard some examples where industry people, the contractors and the unions are talking about actually opening up their own childcare centers. Because traditionally you're not going to find one that opens at 5:30 in the morning. So some of them are actually saying, okay, if that's an obstacle, we're going to address that obstacle by fostering the development of what's needed to get women in the trades. So that's where, again, the value of precisely identifying what the barriers are and then addressing them.
Yeah. And again, a lot of the flexible grant funding that's available now for apprenticeship can be used for some of these creative solutions. Peter, there's another question here in the Q&A. Do apprentices ever have to pay fees or costs in order to enroll in an apprenticeship program? What would be the most common examples?
Generally not. I mean, I think a lot of apprenticeships are connected to community colleges or other county offices of ed, or sometimes even adult schools are the local education agency. But I believe in most states by statute, the apprentices do not pay a fee or often do not pay tuition. That's covered by the state funding or federal funding for apprenticeship.
Okay.
One of the other great advantages.
Yes.
Other questions?
I don't see other questions in either the chat or the Q&A. We're getting pretty close to the end of our time. So I'm thinking that unless last call for any questions, we're still looking at the chat, but I think what we'll do, I see a poll popping up. Let's see, this looks like maybe this is COABE's poll popping up here.
Right.
Let us know if this professional development webinar met your expectations. Okay, there's a poll for you. We're going to take you to the next slide because we wanted to let you know that we are happy to be in touch. We're delighted to know about your interest in this topic and your interest in exploring apprenticeship and equitable apprenticeship. We would like to put in the chat box a form. It's there. Peter has just posted in the chat box a form. It's a very, very quick little thing that asks you, would you like to be contacted about assistance with using the toolkit in your community? Is this of interest to you? Just asks you to tell us a little bit about what it is you're grappling with, what it is you're working on with your programs, and contact information. And we'd be really happy to stay in touch. This is a passion of ours, and we really appreciate your, oh no, it says you need permission. Oh dear, that's not right. Okay, we see your notes that the form doesn't allow permission. Well, that's terrible. We will have contact information for those of you who were on the webinar today, we hope. And so we will do our best to send that out to you. We'd be really delighted to hear from you.
And as Jenny said, we love talking to people who are considering or are using this toolkit. It warms our heart to see this resource being used, and we think it offers a great deal for the adult education world to be involved.
So we're sharing our contact information here too. Feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to hear from you.
Yep. And we really, really are deeply moved that so many people attended this webinar. And again, we'd love to hear from you. This is, as Jenny mentioned, our passion is to kind of move things in the direction of equity in the apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship world.
And with that, I think we have completed our presentation. Not sure if COABE has another word to close us out, or we can just wish you all a very happy National Apprenticeship Week. Hope it brings you some inspiration and motivation to get in touch with others in your community who might be interested in doing this work as well.
Will you share the results of the webinar poll now, or do we get those later?
I'll send them to you a little bit later.
Okay, great. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be with all of you for an hour and hope to hear from you.
It was a pleasure for me to listen and watch. A lot of really good participation. That was an excellent webinar. I want to thank Laura and Burlington English again. Laura, do you want to say a couple words before we sign off?
Nope. I just thank you so much for the information. This was great. And again, if anybody has any questions about Burlington, please let me know. We have my contact information in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. So I want to thank our presenters again, Peter, Jenny, and Colleen. Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week. As a reminder, a replay of the webinar will be posted on coabe.org. If you missed it, or if you want to pass it on to a colleague, it will be available within about 24 hours. So with that, thanks again, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Are those the